All right, these last three sections, I'm sorry we had to break this up into two videos, but all the problems are here all the same. So these last 9 problems all have the same instructions that you've seen in the last, well, 5 or 6 sections. Factor completely, factor completely, factor completely. So when you look at this first problem on 241A, we're right here, 2x squared plus 7x plus 3. There is something in front of the x squared. So my first step is try to get it to go away by factoring it out. The problem is this is a 2, a 7, and a 3. Nothing goes into 2, 7, and 3. So it is as simplified as it's going to get. That 2 is stuck where it is. So I have to take that 2 and multiply it by a 3. And that's going to give me my top number. That gives me my 6 that goes on top. And on the bottom, I still put the middle number, that 7x. That 7 still goes on the bottom. Now I do what I always do. Look for what multiplies to 6, what adds up to 7. And they're both positives. So it's going to be 6 and 1. 6 and 1 multiply to 6. They also add up to 7. Now here's where this is a little different than some of the previous problems. Because I multiplied by 2 at the beginning of the problem, now I have to divide both my answers by 2. So this one on the left, 6 divided by 2, becomes a nice number 3. So that parenthesis is going to be x plus 3. The one on the right, 1/2, doesn't simplify. That's as nice as it gets. So I take that 2 on the bottom, and it moves to the front of the x. And the 1, the numerator, stays after the plus. So x plus 3, 2x plus 1. The denominator goes in front of the x. The numerator comes after the x. All right? So part B, 12x squared minus 7x minus 10. Again, I've got something in front of my x squared. So the first thing I'm going to try is to factor it out. And unfortunately, nothing goes into 12, 7, and 10. So that 12 is stuck, which means I have to multiply it by the negative 10. So my big X is going to have a negative 120 on top and a negative 7 on the bottom. And that tells me a little bit. That tells me that I need to have a plus and a minus number because they multiply to a negative 120. One's positive, one's negative. So I'm looking for 2 numbers that combine to be negative 7. So if I start making my list, 1 and 120, 2 and 60, 3 and 40, 4 and 30. I'm getting closer to 7, but I'm still quite a ways away. 5 and 24, still too far. 6 and 20, still too far. 7 isn't going to work. 8 is going to work. 8 and 15. Hey, there's my numbers right there. 8 and 15. I know those are my numbers because they're 7 numbers apart. And I'm looking for a negative 7. So my 15 is going to be the negative because it's bigger. And my 8 is going to be the positive. Those add up to negative 7. And they multiply to negative 120. Now, if you can't do that in your head, those multiplications, it doesn't matter. Do it on Desmos. Do it on your calculator. You don't get to use your phone. So you need to use a calculator that you are allowed to use. But do that on your calculator. Find the numbers that work. Now, because I multiplied by 12 right here at the very beginning, I have to undo that. I have to divide both of my answers by 12. And then I'm going to simplify those. So my 8 over 12, that simplifies to 2 over 3. Because 4 goes into 8 twice. 4 goes into 12 3 times. I'm just simplifying fractions. And negative 15 over 12. 3 goes into both of those. So that becomes negative 5 over 4 would be my second set of numbers. So my answer is, let's do this one first. So the 3 goes to the front. The 2 goes after the x. And my bottom one, the 4 goes in front of the x, and then minus 5 comes after. So 4x minus 5. Okay, problem C. Same idea. Something's in front of my x squared, but nothing goes into 24x squared, 50x, and 11. So I have to take 24 and multiply it by 11, which is going to give me a great big number. In fact, it's going to be what? 24 times 10 is 240. So then I have to add another 24, so 264. And they need to add up to negative 50. They need to add up to negative 50. So I'm going to start now. I'm going to start picking numbers, right? I know 1 and 264 works. I know that 2 and 132 work. And I can keep going. 3 and 88 is going to work. What do we have? 4 and 66 is going to work. I'm getting closer. 5 doesn't work. 6 will work. 6 and 44. Those are the two that I want. 6 and 44. So I've got 6 and 44. They're both going to be negatives because I multiply to a positive, but I add up to a negative. So I know they're both negative numbers. And now because I multiplied by 24, I have to divide by 24 before I write my parentheses. So the one on the left, negative 6 over 24 becomes negative 1/4. And on the right, negative 44 over 24 becomes negative 11 over 6. So that's what's going to make up my parentheses. So if I get this out of the way, my parentheses are 4x minus 1 and 6x minus 11. That would be my final answer. All right. Okay, next section. Factor completely. Now these ones we've seen them, we've done them, but we never really addressed them specifically. But if you notice, all of these problems in this row have a negative in front of the x squared, and that's not a good thing. We want to get rid of that negative. That's our first goal, is getting rid of that negative in front. And the way that we do that is kind of cool. So on A, we'll do that one first. I want to get rid of a negative. I want to factor it out. So I'm just going to factor out a negative 1. And if you remember when you learned to distribute a negative 1, if I had negative 1 in front of 3x minus 5, you just took that negative 1, multiplied it by everything, and it changed the signs to be the opposites. Well, dividing by a negative 1 does the exact same thing. So this negative 1, when I divide it, when I factor it out, my negative 3x squared just becomes a positive 3x squared. My negative 5x becomes a positive 5x. And my positive 2 becomes a negative 2. Now I just solve this problem the way I do all the other problems, okay? I'm going to big X. I can't get rid of that 3 in the front, so I multiply it by the negative 2, and I get negative 6. And on the bottom, I have a 5. Now, if you noticed, that negative 1 I factored out, I'm done with it. In fact, I'm going to ignore that negative 1 until I write my final answer. It is in front of the parentheses. At this point, all I want to work with is what's inside the parentheses. So I'm ignoring that negative 1. That has nothing to do with my big X because it's on the outside of the parenthesis now. So I take my 3 times it by negative 2 and I get negative 6. So now I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 6, but they add up to be 5, and that's going to be a positive 6 and a negative 1. Those multiply to negative 6, they add up to 5, but just like the last section, I multiplied by 3 to get that 6 up there. So now I have to divide by 3. I've got to divide my answers by 3. This has nothing to do with the negative 1. This is all part of my parenthesis. This is all part of my big X. I'm just dividing by 3, just like I did on these 3 problems above. I need to undo the fact that I multiplied by 3. So on the left-hand side, that's nice because I end up with just the number 2. On the right-hand side, that negative 1/3, that doesn't simplify at all. So that's actually as simplified as it gets. So now my answer is going to be x plus 2. That comes from the left side. and 3x minus 1. That comes from the right side. Now I put my negative 1 back in the problem. Now that negative goes back at the front because it was there from the beginning. I factored it out and it was in front of my parentheses. So I have to put it back in front of the parentheses. So I can't ignore it anymore. All right, so part B. I'm going to just erase a little bit of this so we have some more room. Negative 12x squared minus 40x minus 25. I want to get rid of that negative. So the negative 1 comes out, and my negative 12x turns into positive 12x squared. My negative 40x turns into a plus 40x, and my negative 25 turns into a plus 25. So now when I do my big X, I look for two numbers, but I've got to multiply the 12 and the 25 because that 12 stuck up there. So my top is going to become 300, and my bottom is going to become 40. And now I got to start finding numbers that multiply to 300 and add up to 40. Well, that's actually pretty easy because it's just 30 and 10, right? 30 times 10 is 300. 30 plus 10 is 40. So one more step before I write my answer. Because I multiplied by 12 right here, now I have to divide both of these numbers by 12. So on the left-hand side, I end up with 30 divided by 12. Let's see. 6 goes into both of those, so that becomes 5 over 2, 5 halves. And on the right-hand side, my 10 over 12, 2 goes into both, so that becomes 5 over 6. And now I can write my parenthesis. I can put 2x plus 5 and 6, whoops, started to write the wrong number, 6x plus 5. But don't forget that negative 1. At the very beginning, we had a negative 1 that we pulled out and put in front of the parenthesis. So I've got to put it back out in front of the parenthesis. So this negative 1 right here shows up again right there in my answer. Other than that, it doesn't do anything to the problem. It just shows up at the end. Okay, C. I've got another negative in front of my x squared. So I'm going to factor that out. Negative 1. And I'm left with 36x squared minus 36x minus 7. So it changed all of my signs. And now my big X is ugly because I have to do 36 times 7. I don't know what 36 times 7 is. 36 times 7. 252. So on top, I've got 252. Actually, I have a negative 252. And on the bottom, I've got negative 36. So I'm looking for a positive and a negative number that combine. They multiply to 252. They add up to negative 36. So I've got to take that 252 and just start dividing it by numbers. So I could go to my calculator and just start doing 252 divided by 14. Actually, it was negative 252, right? Negative 252 divided by 14 gives me negative 18. Well, 14 and negative 18, how far apart do we want to be? We want to be negative 36 apart. So 14 is not going to work. So let's try, where did my calculator go? Let's do negative 252. And let's divide it by 6. And I get 42. And I forgot what I'm looking for again. What am I looking for? 36. Hey, there we go. Those are the numbers I want. So 6 and negative 42. So, oh my heck. So 6 and negative 42. Those multiply to be 252. And they add up to be negative 36. If you wanted to use Desmos, you could go to Desmos. And you could do negative 250, nope, slow down, 252 divided by 6, and you get that negative 42. But if I do divided by x, remember I can do the table. I can hit this button up here, this cog wheel up here, and go to the table, and I can just start plugging in different values, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, look, 7 would have worked too. Oh, duh, because we multiplied it by 7. 9 would have worked. 12 would have worked. 18 works. I mean, they don't work as an answer, but they work as options for multiplication. So we are going to stick with our 6 and negative 42. But I multiplied, at the very beginning, I multiplied by 36 to get, I multiplied that by negative 7 to get my 252. So now I have to divide by 36. So my left-hand side becomes 1 over 6. My right-hand side, negative 42 divided by 36 is going to be negative 7 over 6. And then my parentheses are 6x plus 1 and 6x minus 7. And at the very beginning, I factored out this negative 1, so I've got to put it back in the front. Right? That negative 1 in front of the parenthesis needs to stay in front of the parenthesis. So that would be my final answer. All right? Okay, last 3 problems. I know this video is taking longer than the last one, but we are dealing with a lot bigger problems than we did like on the first review. I think the first review, it only took us like 15 minutes. So part A, 10x squared minus 15x plus 5. I have something in front of the x squared, but this time a 5 goes into all 3 of those terms. So you know what? I'm going to factor a 5 out. I'm going to divide everything by 5, and I get 2x squared minus 3x plus 1. You have to divide everything by 5. Yesterday, a lot of people kept just dividing the 10 by 5. You have to divide everything by 5 if you're going to put a 5 in front of the parenthesis. Now I just get to do my big X rule, and you guys are getting pretty good at that. This 2 has to get multiplied by the 1 because it's stuck out in front. So 2 goes on top, negative 3 goes on the bottom. So a negative 1 and a negative 2, those multiply to be positive 2, and they add up to be negative 3. But I multiplied by 2 at the very beginning, right here. I multiplied by 2. This 2 right here multiplied by the 1 to give me the 2 on the top. So now I have to divide by 2. So on the left, I've got negative 1/2. On the right, negative 2 divided by 2, that's just negative 1. So my parenthesis, I get an x minus 1 from the right. I get a 2x minus 1 from the left. And I had that 5 in the front. Remember, clear back here. This 5 shows up at the end, in front of my parentheses. So part B, 16x squared, 64x, 28. 6 doesn't go into all of those. 2 goes into all of them. Does 4? 4 goes into all of those. So let's divide everything by 4. I think that's the biggest we're going to get. Everything divides by 4. So 4x squared plus 16x plus 7. Right? Everything's divided by 4. Now I just big X. But this 4 that's still stuck in front of the x squared has to get multiplied by the 7. Not the 4 on the outside. The 4 in front of the x squared multiplies by the 7. So that gives me 28. And on the bottom, I get 16. So things that multiply to be 16. 1 and 16, 2 and 8. Now, they're all positive, so I'm looking for 2 numbers that add up to 16. Oh, no, I'm looking for numbers that multiply to be 28. Bad math, Mr. Reed. 1 and 28. 2 and 14. That's better. 4 and 7. So 2 and 14, those add up to 16. So 2 and 14 are going to be my numbers. Oh, they're not my numbers because at the beginning, to get that 28 on top, I multiplied by 4 right here. I multiplied 4 and 7 and got 28. So now I have to divide by 4. So my right-hand side becomes what? 1 over 2, 1/2. My right-hand side, 14 over 4, becomes 7 over 2. So my answer is 2x plus 1 from the left, 2x plus 7 from the right, and that 4 in the front. Okay? This 4 that we factored out in the very beginning, now it comes back, and it goes at the front of the parentheses. Okay, part C, great big numbers. 135, 156, and 96. I did this with one of my classes yesterday. Let me see if I can remember what it was. I think 3 went into everything. But you know what? Look, they all have an x. So I can also take an x out of everything because we don't want x cubed. We want x squared. So 3x is going to factor out. So when I take 135 and divide by 3, that gives me 45. And x cubed divided by my x gives me x squared. And then 156 divided by 3 is what? 52. And x squared divided by x is x. Negative 96 divided by 3 is going to be negative 32. And that x divided by x cancels out, so that goes away. So I'm left with 3x multiplied by 45x squared plus 52x minus 32. Now this 3x in front, I'm going to ignore it for a minute because I've got other things I need to do. I've got to do a big X. And in order to do that big X, I need to take this 45 and multiply it by the negative 32 to get my top number right there. So 45 times negative 32, that's above and beyond me. 45, nope, let's clear that. 45 times negative 32, negative 1,440. So negative 1,440. And on the bottom, I want 52. All right, I'm going to get a plus and a minus. Now, trying to come up with the numbers that go into 1,440, there's a lot of numbers. There's a lot of options. So let's start trying to guess. Let's start trying to guess what might work. Now, it ends in a 0. So that means it probably divides by a couple of numbers. It definitely divides by 5. It definitely divides by 10. It might even divide by 20. Let's start there. Let's divide it by 5, 10, and 20. So 1,440 divided by 5 gives me 288. So 288. I want them to be 52 apart. That's way too big. So if I divide it by 10, I'm going to get 144. Those are still too far apart. If I divide it by 20, that gives me what, 72? And if I make this the negative 72, or negative 20 plus 72, that gets me 52. Cool. So negative 20 plus 72. And before I write my answer, remember I multiplied to get that 1440. So now I've got to divide everything by 45. So this one on the left, let's see, 9 goes into 72 and 45, so 8/5. On the right, 5 goes into negative 20, negative 4. 5 goes into 45 9 times. So my answer, I get 5x plus 8. That came from the left. And then I get 9x minus 4. That came from the right. And I also have my 3x from the very beginning, from right here. I've got 3x that I need to put back down here in my answer. So 3x. So that would be my final answer. Now, if you are studying for the test, I would say the problems, the A and B problems, are going to be the bulk of the test. There are going to be some of the problems from over here. Some of these C problems will show up, or similar problems to them. But really, the bulk of the test, most of the questions are going to come from the A and the B column. Probably more B than A. So this is probably the column you're going to see the most, but it is important that you know how to do all three. Don't just study the middle column. Just know that's going to probably show up the most on the test.